Welcome to the HR Resource Podcast, a series designed specifically for business owners and executives who want to better understand people to increase productivity and performance. With today's episode, in our response to COVID-19 podcasts, we want to find someone who tackled challenges and supported others in both physical and mental health. Guess what? Not only found a suitably qualified expert, it's someone you may well already know. I'm delighted to welcome Diane Youdale, who's going to help us understand the common symptoms that manifest when we're not coping, and offer some useful tips and advice on better managing ourselves and essentially others. Helping others is so very important for our HR Resource listeners, many of whom are responsible for the well-being of their staff. Diane is, of course, the artist formerly known as, and actually still very recognisable as, Jet, from that brilliant show Gladiators. As many of you will remember, she was one of the original, and I think, true to say, one of the most popular gladiators. What you may not know is that Diane arrived on ITV's primetime show following successful careers in gymnastics, dance and fitness, including choreography. While she's no longer gladiating, she's still very active in choreography, plus teaching both dance and physical fitness programs. Diane is also, very importantly, a qualified and practicing psychotherapist, counsellor and coach. It's this area that we'll be exploring today, and as Diane says herself, adding psychotherapy to her skills has helped round off her understanding of the challenges humans face in their lives, both physical and mental. Diane, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very much for having me, and what an intro.
Well, that's all right, we try. It's all true, and it's all true. I haven't made any of that up. I can make a bit up if you want me to.
Well,
it's been a while since we last spoke. So how are you, and how's your lockdown experience been?
I'm very, very well, oddly enough. And my lockdown experience has been not too dissimilar to how I pretty much live anyway. I'm fairly insular apart from my client work and a very, very small inner circle of friends, which I've developed, like many people over the years, who I love spending time with. Not a great deal, because obviously I travel around quite a lot with the areas of work that I'm obviously doing. And the one thing I have missed is just being able to go out for a meal, really.
Yeah.
And sharing walks. But the walks and the meals I've continued, obviously meals just with my mum, because I've been caring for mum up here in the northeast during lockdown, and she lives in a really, really pretty village surrounded by bridleways and farmers' fields, and so morning run each morning and the walk in the evening when we were allowed to, of course. Which is not too dissimilar to how I roll anyway. But I have missed being able to go and have a beautifully cooked meal put in front of me by a really skilled chef or someone in a pub, and share a lovely drink and a meal and a catch up with my friends, my inner circle of friends. So I've been good, and Mum's been fab.
Sounds great. It sounds idyllic. But yes, I can't wait for that moment as well, that you can actually sit down and order the food in and not have to start turning to those cookery books and do it all yourself and disappoint the family. Just
yeah.
Pretty much hashtag stand back David's cooking. Check out Instagram. So turning to the topic of today and what we're looking at on a much more serious footing, if I can bring it down a notch or two. Coping with COVID. How do we, looking at ourselves, how do we become aware that things might not be right? What would you say the early signs that maybe you're not coping mentally or physically, not as well as you have been?
So you're talking about in the phase of lockdown and coming out of lockdown, yeah?
Yeah.
Because obviously we've got through the worst now. There is a change. Who knows if there'll be a second wave at this stage, at the point of recording today, mid-July. So looking at how people have been adjusting mentally and emotionally is a very person by person issue, as we all know. But there are some general things that you can tell with anybody who you know and love, and who you've been associating around, distanced, if you're now in a bubble or wherever you are when this podcast is being listened to. Has that person actually not successfully maintained the sort of buoyancy of personality that you knew pre all of this, around about February going into March, if
Yeah.
that person is visibly more withdrawn, may have a slight change in appearance, and their tonality, the way you calibrate into them has changed, then maybe, just maybe, there has been a shift in their mental and emotional well-being that may well deserve a little more space from you if you've got that hunch. And we all get it, with safeguarding and anything that you need to take forward, particularly in an HR environment.
Yeah.
You get that hunch, and we get it about our friends as well. Don't ignore it, because it may be telling you something really valuable about somebody that you really value, whether it's in the workspace or personally.
And what do you think the causes for that change in personality might be?
You've just said the right word, though. We are built to adapt to change. However, when change is enforced upon us, as it was, and it's a complete unknown, then there is something that the human condition will always have a challenge with. And stressors, particularly the unknown, as I was saying, and anxiety can very, very quickly then take one of two different avenues. You either get hyper stressed and you get almost like a mania,
yeah,
or you can go into the other way and you go down, you spiral down and become more withdrawn. Now, whatever happened for you during lockdown, whichever the way you naturally reacted, and I'll disclose how I did. I think I did about the first sort of 10 days, shell-shocked like a bunny in the headlights, like most people.
Like we all did.
Yeah. And I hit a brick wall, slid down it, and sort of curled up for about another week or two. What did you do, David?
Well, I just threw myself into another direction, which is I knew that I'd drive everybody nuts if I stayed in the house for too long. So I volunteered with the NHS responders. Not because I'm a wonderfully sort of altruistic individual. It's because I needed to get out of the house. So that was and aside of that, 1,200 hours of being on call, and I think I've done probably 12 calls. So my cunning plan didn't quite work out, but yeah. I also volunteered to do all the shopping, which is something I hate doing, but it also got me out of the house. So that I needed to be active, because I would just go the wrong way. I would go exactly the way you're explaining it if I didn't.
Yeah, so you're one of those people that did sort of outwards energy, sort of expending and getting busy and keeping busy, rather than the sort of curling up and kind of regrouping, refocusing and adapting. It's that quick kind of adapting to change, the enforced change that was put upon us, and also coming to terms with this incredibly serious, huge dark cloud that no one really saw coming. I, like you, would have loved to have done the NHS that role as well, but I'm living and looking after an elderly, very vulnerable, so I couldn't allow myself to be exposed outside of that at all. But that was my first instinct, absolutely. And I thought, well, no, I now have to do something that's against every instinct in my body, like yourself, which is to do things, but to actually now sit with this and see what comes up. Fortunately, a lot of my work as a psychotherapist is already online: Zoom, FaceTime, StreamYard, all these things that you can, data platforming and what have you, that a lot of therapists have to work today, regardless of lockdown and COVID. So my working life didn't actually change. I knew I had that as a structure to maintain and be part of. But after I kind of sort of curled up for a little bit, and it does make you start to look, and it did for me, it can for many, and I think maybe for yourself, David, you get a chance to be still, and not a lot of us can do that unless it is literally enforced. And I know for me it was, and I have to admit, I'd spent easily up to the last 14 years since I left my married life down in Surrey after nearly 30 years. I was a particularly good runner. I would do every 3 to 4 days, off somewhere else and off somewhere else for work.
You never stop. I know you've mentioned before, you just never stop. You are that ball of energy.
Well, yeah, and some of it was for need rather than want and desire, sadly. A very interesting set of experiences for just over a decade, but ones I really, really think, wow, if anything can inform me more about the human condition and people and how we are in real terms, it was that decade and a bit of my life, rather than the golden line decades, the many decades before. So for me, lockdown actually meant me sleeping in the same bed for more than 3 to 4 nights consecutively for the first time in nearly 14 years. No, I like, because obviously I'd had holidays and periods like that where I'd be still, but generally my life hadn't been still up until then. So for me, it was an incredible opportunity to really recollect, reform, and all these other things that you can do.
So in terms of some of those more negative elements that might trigger from a situation, a crisis, a sudden change to our lifestyles like this, what other coping mechanisms are there other than just sort of throwing yourself into charity work and reflecting? What other things do you think would help us better cope?
I think routine is top of the list for many people. I think that was very much echoed around by lots of coaches and therapists who were being interviewed within social distancing means or across the media for the first few weeks, because people were really struggling. There was a lot of fear, a lot of anxiety, which happened to be the most contagious emotions alongside anger that we can all actually share. And it was odd because we were sort of sharing it across the villages, sharing it across towns and cities, across the airwaves, across TV and media, of course. And it just got almost to a boiling point, didn't it, by about 8 weeks to 12 weeks in. So I think the biggest thing that came out of that was, for me, when I'm listening to all the other parts of advice, was getting a routine, finding a new normal. And in that, I would have very much encouraged anybody that I certainly was working with is to do the wonderful thing that naturally occurred for a lot of people, which was a kind of edit. You get chance. It's like a swinging pendulum, isn't it? If it's swinging, you never get a chance to sort of stop at that bottom point and actually observe exactly what's there. You had chance to actually really take a closer look at the stuff that does and doesn't work, and get rid, so as lockdown's easy, you can leave the stuff behind that no longer serves a purpose. And it was during that stillness, by having a routine, you could actually get a chance to do that, possibly for the first time ever.
Yeah, the routine's an excellent one, because I would bizarrely say that I've reset myself in the edit. I've reset myself now in terms of a working routine, which I would say is far more productive than I had been. I'd got myself into so many bad habits. I'd got myself into routines that were actually not delivering anywhere close to what I would really hope to do, and then getting frustrated with myself, and that's starting a cycle of negativity. Whereas having that opportunity to just stop and think about the things that I really wanted to do, in its way, developed a motivation that stimulated productivity. So it's almost self-fulfilling in that regard, in that you're being quite selfish. You're doing the thing that you really want to do, but now you've got that time to do it.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm lucky. I'll say we're lucky in that regard. So there are other people that might not be in that situation. So for people that have perhaps coped better, if they find somebody in their life, in their relationship, it might be their partner, it might be a family friend, or it might be somebody they work with, and they identify that there is this issue, how could you best approach a way to support them and help them? What advice might you give to somebody that's identified a problem in somebody else?
Well, if it's in the workplace, of course, we need to be very careful with that. It's going back to that hunch thing again before safeguarding. If there is a big hunch and you think somebody is in a position where they're not coping and there could be a danger to themselves or others, psychologically, emotionally, then of course you have to take that to your manager, line manager. We all know this within HR, and it is vitally important, and it's not troubleshooting or anything like that. We can't be too careful, because there are awful cases, and there's been many during lockdown where people have sort of waved a red flag and no one's really seen it, and before it's too late. So we can't undermine just how important, if you do notice somebody is struggling, to kind of really sit with your gut and explore ways to take it forwards. One of the best ways, see, as a therapist, I'm very wary of kind of wading into something that may be my projection. I'm very good at making sure my filters are clean enough to calibrate into what may be really happening for that person, other than what my assumption or what my gut, what my feeling is. So there's a difference between that gut feeling and you making an assumption based on what might be yours in that moment. It's called ownership. And not projecting onto that person. Be very, 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 very careful of that. That's kind of why I keep my social circle quite small and quite clean, because I don't get involved in tittle tattle and things. But this is the real thing about humans. We get attached and we can. So in the workplace, there are great protocols within most HR departments, and possibly more so than now. So do get up to date with what is particular to where you are working, with what's there now for you or to protect you and those that you're working with, within the field that you're where you actually are. You have to edit that out because I did way too more, all that. As to where you are particularly now in the workplace. But on a personal level, you've got to veto that a little bit more carefully, because I always say parachuting in behind someone's boundaries. People have boundaries, they have protection. You can tell when someone's trying to defend something because they get very defensive or they get very attacking. Usually it means the soft bit in the middle behind the boundaries is in pain in some way. Are they protecting something? Be very careful if you try to parachute in behind their boundaries and their barriers, because you will get attacked, and that relationship then can be forfeited to some degree. So there's little things like, oh, I've noticed, are you okay? We're all struggling right now, and I've noticed this and this about what's happening. It may just be me seeing that in you, because that might be where I am right now. If you do ownership of sentences like that and make it a bit of comedy, it gives that person the space to go, oh no, I'm all right. But then a few minutes later, they go, well, actually, because they know then that you've owned it, possibly being you projecting onto them, but then you've given them the space to calibrate for a few moments.
You've lowered a barrier, haven't you? Which is we're all fine, we're all okay, we're all good, and we're all talking about the positive side of things. But if you actually lower it and say, you know what, I've not been too good today, or something's happened, there's an empathy, isn't there? You're starting to reach out to somebody and giving them that license to be able to talk about themselves.
That's it. And allowing that person then suddenly to just do that, to talk. And instead of grabbing their hand and dragging them here and dragging them there, we can do this and you can do that, and you thought of this, just pull up alongside them. We call it in therapy. You pull up alongside the person and just sit beside them and listen. Don't grab their hand. Don't pull them around. Don't hug them. I mean, it's all metaphor, of course. Hug them tightly if they don't want to. Don't smother them. Don't carry them. Let them tell you exactly what they may need in that moment. And it may just be that in that moment, they don't know. They may not find the words for it, because some people can't put words to emotions that easily. But later on, they may go, oh, it'll pop into their mind, and they'll give you a little text. Oh, thank you for earlier. You know, I've been thinking, blah, blah, blah. Or a week later. But even if they don't come back and tell you, they may tell someone else who it's important to, who can create that support network for them.
Yeah, and it's also there's a new realm of skills that are being developed as actually the listeners might not be appreciating this. They might be thinking this is just being done over some digital audio device, as opposed to the fact that we're actually zooming this conversation, recording the Zoom. You know, the listeners will have the ability to see our wonderful, attractive faces, but with that as a typical way in which people are communicating these days. I mean, I've seen some situations where people have shared on social media work events where somebody has stormed off. They've literally been one of those squares, one of the Brady Bunch squares on the screen, and decided, well, that's it, I've had enough, and they've paddy fitted off and just stormed off.
Okay.
But that's a flag, isn't it? I mean, everybody laughs. Oh, look what's happened to Jeff. You know, oh, look, you must have just not liked that new policy that we've just devised, or now introduced. But actually, that's behaviour that we were talking about right at the beginning there, about the different behaviours and the way that people are. If that's out of sorts, then that's obviously a flag. And I think that's the other thing that for me in the workplace, is not to be one of those people that finds it funny, you know, what's happening to somebody else, because perhaps need to be the person that reaches out rather than joins in the laugh.
Oh, absolutely. It is a fine line to, you know, I think we all know from person to person it's harder across a medium like this, Zoom, or any of the other digital platforms, to really calibrate in. I'm very fortunate. I have what I call an auditory lead. I very much can tell what's going on for a person just by hearing their voice. So I'm very happy with my clients who just like phone call sessions as opposed to seeing the visual as well. Visual is great, I get the voice still, but even for me, just the voice says so much. But to calibrate into somebody across a digital platform will never ever be the same as having that person in the workspace. And of course, as we all do drift back to a working environment very different to what we once knew, of course, and rightly so, you will have that chance. And I think people will may have rather during lockdown sort of tuned their radar, their kind of aerials. You know, I often think of it as like a little transistor radio with an aerial sticking out around about hip height, sort of that gut place, like an antenna. In NLP, neuro-linguistic programming, we call it the RAS, I think, the reticular activation system, RAS, and it's kind of where the nous, where your gut instinct is, and it's the bit beyond words, the bit where we calibrate into how people really are, where we get the hunch. We'll go back to that word again that I used at the beginning, and to not be afraid of what that hunch starts to tell you as a person, because we can misinterpret it, and of course we can usually be about us and our own stuff. But to be able to become more finely tuned, the good therapists often are, they take years to be able to get there. And it's an ongoing work in process, believe me. But it's a powerful thing once you have got it. And then having the words, having the structure of those open-ended questions and sentences to be able to pull up alongside somebody and check out, because you're not a trained therapist if you're working in a different role in any department, but you are a human being, and we all have the right to maybe reach out or create a safe space for somebody.
I mean, and some of those, that's excellent advice. I mean, I think that there are degrees as well in that giving ourselves license to have conversations with people, and I think the listening aspect is so very important, because the number of times you can be in a conversation with somebody and you just know that the person isn't really listening. They're just considering what's the next thing I'm going to say that's going to be really clever and sort of trump them in this conversation. It's it's almost like a tennis match, rather than it being a proper conversation or a situation where you're listening genuinely to what somebody's saying. And it's quite incredible when you switch off for a second from that type of combative conversation and then actually listen to what people are saying. And I think that's what you're talking about with your auditory approach. You can really tune in to what people are saying, and it's a skill, but I think it's a skill we all need to learn, because I think you can gather so much by having that ability. Just for me, and in relation to perhaps touching on some of the dark, you mentioned briefly about people perhaps having some, in this very difficult time they've been through, having some very dark thoughts, and people even talking openly about, you know, taking their lives and you know, thoughts of suicide. Is there a line to be drawn there? I mean, that's a very, very tricky area that a lot of people, a lot of very experienced HR people would stumble over, I think, in having conversations with. What advice might you give in that situation, even if you are like an HR director, HR manager, owner of a business, and you're facing that with somebody?
Well, I think if you are in that, if you're an HR director, you probably haven't got to that position without having already come across this a few times in your career. It does happen. Obviously, it happens within my line of work as a psychotherapist, and our protocols will be slightly different to whatever you have within your own company. But it all comes down to safeguarding first and foremost. So if you haven't already had the experience of having somebody alert you to another member of a department who is talking not only dark thoughts, but actually ideation, which isn't just I feel low, I feel suicidal at times, actually talking about how they do it, that is the big red flag. Right. That is immediately line manager territory and safeguarding. So that is clear cut throughout, no matter where you work in the world. That is something you have to do. First and foremost, you must inform the person who is at the center of this that you're hearing this, that you're concerned, and that you have a line of duty, a line of care as a co-worker to pass this on, with or without their permission. because that person, you know, you can't say, you don't say that to them, but that you will be informing, is it okay? You can ask their permission, but you do have that in you to actually take forwards if they're talking about when, where, and how they'll do it. So ideation is slightly different from people saying, I felt so down, I've, you know, sometimes I've thought about, is it worth it?
Yeah.
If you do hear someone saying that, then you can say, goodness me, you know, I'm very sad to hear that. Of course, that's cause for concern. Where are you now with it? Because obviously that was a thought they had a week ago and they're just referring to a bad week they'd had. Check where they are now. And they will tell you, because if they've told you that much already, probably they're going to tell you a little bit more. They'll say, oh, actually, no, this week's a bit better, blah, blah, blah. Keep your eye on them. If somebody's already said, you know, if somebody really does go into detail about how that is immediate, passing up to manager and line manager level for safeguarding. I'll say that again because I'm just aware, David, that my mum went to the bathroom behind me. It's just down the corridor, and there was a loo flushing.
Didn't hear it.
You
Honestly,
didn't?
didn't hear it.
Okay.
No, I thought I was listening very intently. See, but I didn't hear that bit. I was listening to your voice.
Don't worry. So I'll just say that bit again. So if somebody's talking about it, just check where they are right now. So I hear last week that you weren't feeling so good. How are you this week? What's going on for you? Are you all right? Are you any, you know, is any shifts? That's very therapist to say that, but you'll find your own words to say it. But if somebody is beginning to talk about, or they stay in that kind of state, and you've noticed they're still in that state, you know, invite them for a coffee somewhere and just let them talk. Let them talk, let them be heard, and let them go where they need to go, if at all. But maybe even be bold if you are really got that hunch and you're really worried. Check out and say, where are you since you last told me about those thoughts you were having? Because they may say, you know, I'm thinking more and more about it, which means they are starting to plan. Yeah. And that is immediate line manager referral for safeguarding.
Yeah.
On a personal level, it's different though, isn't it, Dave? I don't know if you've ever had the experience in your life with a good friend or a family member. I hope not.
No, the closest is the last role that I had as an interim. I was involved in being a moderation of a Facebook group and got involved in having quite extensive exchanges online with individuals who were facing very tough times. It was related to alcohol dependency, and so that in itself had its own challenges, but when it also manifested itself in terms of thoughts and suicide, sort of double red flags, and that highlighted to me how difficult it can be to tread a line in terms of appropriate courses of action. So one of the things that I put in place was actually to have training put in place with all of the staff that were in the call centre. And I mean, I wouldn't say this is all they did, because, you know, it was only a small percentage of individuals that would present like this, but it doesn't matter. Small percentage is still too much. And being the first people perhaps to have identified these discussion points because of the forum that we're involved with, I felt it was important that we all had the same level of training, the same level of understanding from professionals. So we organised a couple of courses with the Samaritans and with another organisation that was able to help. And that gave the confidence in the individuals in the call centre to be able to then respond.
Yes.
So I think that's a key thing. If you're not sure and you're not aware, and you think it's something that you need to be aware of, and I think if you are an HR director or an HR manager, I would endorse going on a course specifically around that type of conversation, because having that knowledge is essential. You never know when you're going to need it.
And I think you've said the word there is confidence, because I think unless you've been around the territory of being alongside or knowing of somebody who sadly is in that position of a very, what we call a low life state, where it's all gone very dark, and they really see the only way out is to go to sleep in, or whatever phrase they use. It can be scary, but I think if you have experienced it and been around it, you can calibrate into the signs, and also you develop a confidence in the right wording. It would be different for everybody, but there are things you can say which can really help somebody and help signpost them to getting a wider field of support. It's about a support network as well when somebody's in what we call a very low life state phase, where they're contemplating and maybe idealizing how to. And in that place, a person can be supported through it, and they can, with time, work their way through it if the right protocols are in place. So yes, within your organization and within your HR department, revise it if there are any updated courses, particularly since lockdown. Do go and look at what the updated thinking is on this state, or this what we call theme. We call it themes within life, or where we focus our energies. And it's sad to know that we are born into life, yet we can all go through phases where we actually consider that life isn't quite what we wanted it to be and not worth it. And that's terribly sad. So you can even hear in those words I'm using things like worth and value. When somebody feels worthless and valueless and there's no value to living, that's when you can very quickly spiral. And something you mentioned a few minutes ago there, if you add into that then the compensatory behaviors and the medicinal behaviors like alcohol and drugs, or any other behaviors where you are distracted or you're numbing the real cause and symptom beneath, then there's more red flags involved, because you need to be looking at other things like dependencies and pulling away from that and creating the first thing I said, routine, how to eat, how to move, how to sleep. I know it sounds really simple because we do it all automatically, but eat, move, sleep means you be healthy, because we all, during high anxiety and stress, the eating goes, then the sleeping goes, and we're not active because we weren't allowed to at one point. So the three main pillars of health, to make your fourth pillar, happiness, the corners of your square of life, were blown out of the water. So people did become very vulnerable, and I still think people are rebuilding that. But what a great chance to rebuild that anyway. Yeah,
I couldn't agree more than certainly getting your sleep pattern sorted out, because my sleeping has been shocking. It's been all over the place. Weird dreams, getting up at strange times in the morning, sleeping in. It's just it's nonsense. But I think if you can get a routine, coming back to that, I think it's all well and good. Now, thinking about routine and raising the tone a little bit, and thinking about being proactive and preventative measures, and actually finding a way to be healthy or healthier. What would your advice be for people who want to avoid all these negative thoughts of poor mental health?
Well, I think I'll carry on with the eat, move, sleep, be healthy theme. This is from some of the work by an amazing guy who lives in San Diego called Paul Chek, C-H-E-K. Look him up. He does some great bits across the internet. Some of his lectures that he's been doing for 30 odd years. I was certainly inspired by him all those years ago. And he's one of these great guys who kind of join all the dots between kind of, what's happening to you hormonally while you sleep, and what you need from good organic food from the planet that hasn't had chemicals thrown at it. I mean, he was doing all this stuff, and he's a strength and conditioning coach. I mean, the guy strips off in the morning apparently and runs out of his gorgeous luxury, you can imagine San Diego, hot, nice weather most of the time, goes running down his river and jumps in his waterfall. He's beautifully bonkers in the most genius, crazy of the ways. My father was an astronomer, so I grew up kind of listening to lots of stories about the cosmos and energy and matter and physics and lots of stuff. And my brain just likes to go and add things together to make all sorts of areas of understanding that I haven't had time to research and read in lots of books. Instead, I listened to some of the work of Paul, and I used to work at his clinic, the European Institute here, the Czech Institute over in the northwest of England for a period of time as a psychotherapist, but I did some of the basic training in strength and conditioning, spine health, nutrition, holistic lifestyle counselling that Paul had found out. And it just opens up your mind completely. So do re-educate. There's a lot of on the internet, but there's a lot of good stuff too. Paul Chek stuff is very good. He's very well read. He's academic, a bit bonkers in the most wonderful of ways. So just find out things that fit and work for you. But the main four pillars are eat. Learn to eat things that aren't made by men in white coats, because if you eat things made by men in white coats, you'll meet the men in white coats earlier. In other words, swims in the sea, falls from the tree and grows from the ground. You can't go that wrong. But nothing made by many white coats if you can possibly help it. The earth itself does support, as long as it's not too chemically interfered with, as much as the human microbiome actually needs, because that's what we're born from, what we go back to, blah, yada, you know that. And coming back to the sleeping bit, yes, you need two phases of sleep at night, 4 hours for physiological and 4 hours for your psychological, which is usually between 2 and 6 in the morning. And most people have been waking when the REM stage between 2 and 6 in the morning, all sorts of crazy, vivid, lucid dreams, memories, resolving stuff from the past, some good dreams, some not so good dreams. But it's vital. Sleep debt is the biggest form of torture out there across the world, always has been, always will be, because you become neurotic during daytime hours if you don't get your proper sleep resolved, because everything in your body needs to realign, reappropriate, repair from the nutrition while you're sleeping. So if you've had disordered sleeping, which predominantly most people have had during lockdown, you now know the value of it more so. Yeah. Find a new routine. Your body will naturally start to tell you as the stress starts to ease away and we get back to a more normalized daytime routine, reviewed, new career, new training, whatever, and you'll find it'll start to come together. But do experiment a little bit, and of course move. We are not made to be inactive. I'm lucky. I love anything outdoors, particularly walking and a light jog, but I also love dance and movement and strength and conditioning minimally. That's hard on my joints after being a gladiator all those years. But it's just fun. Just move and find something that is fun post-lockdown, probably during lockdown. I don't know if you did, David.
Well, I used to be very, very regular visitor to the gym, but I don't think I was doing it in the right way. I think I was just doing the very sort of male thing of going out there and getting very sweaty and working as hard as I could, not treating it necessarily the best thing I could have been doing. It felt like I had a good workout.
Well, if it felt that way, then you probably were.
But I haven't had that opportunity, but I don't feel any worse for that, because I'm doing a much shorter routine in the mornings.
Good.
Various different bits of cardio. The thing that I've discovered actually is yoga. I've been starting to do elements of yoga. I wouldn't say I'd be doing a full class, but things like stretches for the lower back, and all sorts of interesting elements of that. But I would say the one star in my lockdown experience for fitness has been our little Yorkshire Terrier. And I wouldn't say she's it's Joe's love and pride and joy and is her big mate, and we get on with each other, we like each other. I think she started to have a new appreciation for me because I take her on a regular walk. Those walks are getting quite long, and her poor little legs, bless her, she's 14, but still amazing. Yeah, which I think in doggy years is getting on for nearly 100, so she thinks she's doing well.
Oh, jeepers. Oh, I do feel for you. But what a wonderful, magical time the pair of you shared, and just getting fitter and healthier in the best gym of the world, that green space out there. Green space or blue spaces near the sea or a river or a lake, if you're lucky enough. Always the best gym.
Sets the tone for the day if you can get out there nice and early and have a good walk. And
Totally. And I think there'll be so many people in new appreciation of this prior to lockdown who found that actually that was the best thing. And even if it meant them having to walk a few blocks away, if they weren't fortunate enough to be in a more sort of green space environment near a park, to find a green space and just be there and spend that time walking and being out in the fresh air, where it's obviously safer as well in terms of COVID. But I'm also a Pilates, I wouldn't say specialist, I didn't go into great depth, but I have been teaching Pilates now for nearly 20 odd years. Before it was ever a thing, I came across it in the mid-1980s when I moved to London to train as a dancer at London Contemporary, because it was our body conditioning model that we used then, but no one knew what Pilates was. We actually had a reformer studio and everything. It was like torture chamber, but it was the way they trained dancers even back then to have very strong bodies that then wouldn't go on to build any extra bulk if you were predispositioned for that, to become the elite dancers of the day. So I knew about Pilates from many, many years ago. And when I designed a wellness in the workplace program called the Core Philosophy program years ago, when I was training as a psychotherapist and placed in the NHS as part of my placement, I was asked by the head of HR in a very large hospital in Surrey, the Royal Surrey Hospital in Guildford, and they said, oh, you know a bit about nutrition and fitness, can't you put a program together, Di, having been a gladiator and all that? That helps our doctors, nurses, the clerical staff, everybody be fitter and healthier in the workplace. So I did. And 20 odd years on, I still, as part of the physical, active, interactive part of the program, even if we don't have the space, I get everyone on their feet and I do my version of vertical Pilates, which works just as well. So I've gone and evolved that part of my knowledge and understanding, particularly for spinal health. Because remember, through the central nervous system, the spinal cord, all information is passed from the brain into the body. So we really need to look after, you know this only too well, we need to look after that part of our body first and foremost structurally before we start springing around and bounding about and doing anything, just for long-term good health. So eat, move, sleep, be healthy. If you get those first 3 things right and you know, tailor them and get them just right for who you are right now, not who you'll be in 6 months, but right now, post-lockdown, coming out, your be happy part of your four corners of your square will be so much easier to come about, I promise you.
Fantastic. I mean, what you mentioned there, nicely into the final question here, which is that you were asked by an enlightened NHS HR professional to design a program for them. Not every organisation has such enlightened views in terms of wellness and well-being. Do you have any suggestions or tips for those that have previously handled that type of approach or initiative as a sort of it's a compliance, it's a tick box, yes, we'll buy in this off-the-shelf well-being program, some benefits and some vouchers and whatever, maybe a discounted trip to the gym? What could they do? What should they be doing to try and help their staff to be healthier and mental health to be in better shape?
Oh, well, you could ask me to come in and deliver core philosophy over a 6-week period for an hour, an hour each week. You know, they were talking 1990, 91, when I was approached by this head of HR for this very large hospital, it's even bigger now, to write this program. Oh, I didn't sleep for days, weeks. I was so excited to pull something together like the wonderful Paul Check has done over the other side of the world, but for a very specific group of people, of which I've been counselling for 5 years. It's part of my placement. I continued in my placement because I loved it there and they liked me being there, because I brought quite a bit to the table, other than the safe talking space, of course, because of my knowledge. Because we are talking now over 20 years ago, where there weren't very many people like me who could do the mental health and the nutrition and the physical fitness all under one umbrella. You had people who were very specialist in either one of those areas. But I like bringing it together because we are a complete, a whole of the many dimensions. I never like to box anything away from you because everything's connected. So it was easier back then, I guess, for the HR department. It was in compliance with the NICE guidelines as well. So I don't know where HR departments will be with that. And yes, it's a lot of it is tick box for them. But I think, again, if you've got yourself into a place where you are now head of something like human resources, where the well-being of your staff, yes, you will be inundated with so much protocol, so much safeguarding and paperwork, and rightly so. But again, go back to what I said at the very beginning of this podcast, use your hunch too. What else could be there in the workspace? I know Sweden are ahead and some of the other Scandinavian countries about making sure within the workspace, as long as things are well thought out, there are spaces people can go to just do a little bit of stretch. Is there a mat on the floor with a nice screen or a Swiss ball and a few bands? Do people know how to do stretches and mobilizations if they're sat 8 hours at their desk? What else can they be doing in the green space outside, or the wet space, the blue space? I'm just picturing a lake at the back of one building that I did core philosophy in, where we'd go out and do some stuff around on a lunchtime. They loved me, and they would all go back and eat ourselves silly before carrying on again. But those little punctuations during there were so many creative ways you can care for your staff in a slightly more obtuse manner, but we're still now particularly more scientifically well read and underpinned, thankfully.
I think one of the issues we're going to face as well is this whole working from home explosion, because that's what we've had to do. The vast majority of us, I know there have been people who've been on the front line and doing amazing jobs, but a lot of us are having to work from home. And businesses are facing a situation where they're realizing, actually, we're still able to function, we're still able to work, we're still able to perform as a business. Yeah. Do we need this office? Is this the way in which we're doing it? I've seen articles written by people saying the office is passé. You know, that's yesteryear now, and we need to think of new ways to work. So I think that the idea of well-being now is something that within the typical office environment might have had one approach in terms of the way people try to look at ergonomics and try to look at, you know, what people had in their canteens and those sort of things. But I think now it's got to evolve into looking at, yes, that'll still exist to a certain extent, but what about taking care of those people who are not in that environment and have got to look after and motivate themselves because they're further removed? And I think there's a massive opportunity there and a need.
Yes. No, I agree with you. I agree with you entirely there. Lockdown and COVID has opened up a completely different landscape. One I'd beg to kind of almost believe in it in the most positive of senses we probably would have been heading towards anyway. Having lived in London many years ago for a few years as a student before moving down to Surrey, I could already see then. I don't know whether I kind of can look ahead quite a bit. I find myself gazing, not so much these days, but as a younger woman I certainly did, and thought there must come a point of saturation of things like the limited amount of people that can be bunged in any 1 hour on a tube. And certain tube lines, Northern Line in particular, Central Line another one, you know, there's got to be a point of break. You know, what's not sustainable collapses, and transport systems within the larger cities, particularly somewhere like London, I always thought there'd come a day whereby surely either staggered going into work and leaving work would be one solution, and then better still, what about the day when we can all have these things called computers and work from home? I mean, this is 20-30 years ago. I remember my first computer, I'm sure many people can, a TV thing, take 5 to 10 minutes to warm up and find any documents on when I was studying.
I had a laptop that would have taken Rhino to carry it around.
Yeah, exactly. So, you know, I think, are we now in a place whereby we'd have been heading towards maybe 10 years from now, and maybe lockdowns expedited the process?
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah, very possibly. Diane, I've got to thank you. That's been so fascinating. Excellent to go through some typical areas, some areas that I think have probably been stressing a few people directly because of lockdown, but also thinking about their workplace and how they can look after people who are working remotely. Some great tips, some great advice. We've talked for quite some time, but we've just scratched the surface, I think. Maybe there's a series in here. Maybe there's 1 or 2 more areas we could do a deep dive in. Particularly interested in the listening side of things and the way that you can zone in and tune into somebody's mood or somebody's attitude with the way that...
Yeah, no problem. I'll put some more succinct notes together for that, because it's always something I instinctively do, but when I have to think about actually putting it down into written dialogues, which I do with some clients, I call it the rehearsed dialogue. So it's there for you when you need it, rather than the emotional stuff that can come out, because you know, sometimes people will need to think about things before they say them to communicate clearly where they are. And I think in heightened situations whereby we're caring for somebody who may be very much in a dark place, it's those times that we have those few sentences, those special words that'll be just what that person needs.
Spot on. What a lovely place to stop as well. Thank you very much, Diana. Just before we go, what's on the cards for Diane Youdale going forward? What projects are you working on? Anything you can tell us about, or is it all hush hush? I know you've been doing a podcast yourself with a fan who's got a Gladiator. Is it Gladpod?
That's right. Yeah. Well, we've been doing Gladpod for about the last 6 months. We've just been amassing interviews with some of the original Gladiators from 1992, the original team. We've pretty much got all of them now, apart from Wolf, who's in New Zealand. So again, the miracles of digital. He was actually going to come over this year, but of course lockdown changed all that. So we'd have managed to get him in our first series. So we've just bagged our first series. It's going out. It's doing very well. It's myself and a producer called David Blackmore, who is one of the producers on ITV's This Morning programme. He does a lot of the news feeds in.
Right.
Fantastic guy, genuine Gladiator fan as well, and asked me a couple of years ago, would I be alongside him to co-host some Glad Pods? And so we have. So we'll move into our second series of recording that, again, I think within the next few months. And producer Paul Noddings, who's actually, again, from the Northeast, who I gave a reference to. It's a whole other story. It's a brilliant story. As a young man, to go and do a thing on a website, because he did the original website for Gladiators for LWT in the day. He was only about 19 then. And of course, he now works for Disney as one of their major kind of digital online platforming guys. He's amazing. And he's helped us produce, because he knows every fact and stat. He's from Darlington originally. Every fact and stat about every Gladiator.
Yeah, they're a bit strange in Darlington.
So he's brilliant. So working with those. And of course, I work for CAIS, which is a company based in Wales for counselling. And we're doing a piece of research called I Can Work at the moment, a piece of work about the validity of talking therapy to be ready to go back into the workplace, of course, which is quite timely. And I'm just doing a few bits of media here and there. I haven't actually future pitched my own goal setting for quite a while. And it was your question just now asking me, and I thought about it and I thought, actually, I don't really have anything big on the horizon yet that I want to look forward to doing. But when I do, I'll let you know.
Come back and tell us all about it. Diane, thank you very much. Thoroughly enjoyed it.
Thank you.